The past few years have been a tumultuous time for masculinity. We've witnessed the furore whipped up by the manosphere and the fear that we're raising a generation of Andrew Tate clones. We've had primary prevention programs brought into schools, spurred by the will to reduce Australia's appalling rates of domestic violence. Men under 30 just played a major role voting Donald Trump back into power, influenced by his appearances on the world's most popular male-led podcasts. And swirling around all of this social discourse is one pervasive word that's stuck to young men like a curse: toxic.
We need to be shifting the conversation towards that air of possibility. We should be talking about aspirational masculinity. We should be talking about what we should be seeking and achieving, not what we shouldn't be looking after.
With me to talk through this and more is psychologist and Movember Director, Dr. Zac Seidler, a preeminent researcher and thought leader working to evolve men's mental health in Australia. This is Dr. Zac Seidler. Welcome to Young Blood, the volunteer video podcast dedicated to young men's mental health. I'm your host, Cal McPherson, and this is a platform for young men and their loved ones to share lived experience stories and show that no matter what you're going through, you're not alone. Suicide is the number one killer of young people, and changing that starts with speaking up. So let's do it. This show touches on some tough topics that may provoke strong emotions. If you find anything in this chat distressing, please do whatever you need to do to look after yourself.
We see USA trying to grow your savings, dreaming of a home for your fur baby and human one, and kicking life goals. Because we're here too, seeing more South Australians thriving. We see you, South Australia. Credit Union SA.
Zac, why is there such a focus on telling young men everything that they shouldn't be without asking them what they want and why?
Why is that focus is a great question. I wish I had, a pure answer. I really hope that we're getting to a point now where we're realizing the importance of leaning in and engaging young men in this conversation. It's whether it's elections, it doesn't matter what inflection point we're kind of talking about. Young men are making it clear that they want to be a part of this conversation, that they want to be cultural builders rather than witnesses to culture, I think, in some ways. And really, when it comes down to it, I think that their voice hasn't really been respected. And there's really good commentary at the moment about the fact that rather than seeing young men as the solution, we are posing them as the problem. And any group that you speak with or about in those terms is going to not only fight back, but also is going to disengage, I think, in many ways. And that's what we've seen for quite a long time, is a fundamental disengagement and apathy by lots of young men. And that is really the worst outcome we can ask for as a society, is to build a bridge and then, just completely destroy it. Instead, we need to be really connectors here. And that's something that I think we're failing at.
And this is all about young men. So it needs to be led by young men. It can't be led by someone else, anyone else who's putting it on to young men and saying this is how you should be or shouldn't be. It shouldn't be any surprise that that's being pushed back against or ignored, or that counterculture alternatives like an Andrew Tate are appealing when the alternative that's being given to them is you're the problem, you're a loaded gun, here's everything that's wrong with you, and we don't really have much of an answer around what you should be instead, just all the things you shouldn't be.
Exactly. It's all problems, no solutions. And, Cal, you and I shouldn't be the ones telling them this stuff either. We're too old. But I think that we're old mates here. But I think that co-design is like the most, we talk about it in research all the time, which is like, nothing about them without them. And you cannot go about saying, oh yeah, we're going to do this awesome study on TikTok. And you sound like such a fucking boomer. And it's just like, oh yeah, we're going to create this thing. They're going to come. We're going to do this thing on the TikToks. Yeah. And that's what it ends up sounding like.
Snapchat, that didn't quite work.
Yeah, the chats. Isn't that what it is? Instead of going, oh, maybe we should get like a youth lived experience panel and ask them what's going on in their lives, and it should be diverse, and it should be really understanding the complexities and nuances of their lives. Because the reason that this is all falling on deaf ears is because it's homogenizing, it's simplistic, and it's a box. And young men are saying, we are more than that. We are different. We are diverse. We have contradictory lived experiences, and you need to be willing to deal with the messiness of that. And so when it comes to talking about, like, telling them what they can and cannot do, we always talk about the fact that these conservative voices, largely, they are conservative, they are transgressive, they are, really, really pushing the bounds of like traditional masculinity. They're trying to get back to these really simplistic ways where men, had a very clear role, and it was domination and power. And it's an absolute no-brainer that those narratives are far more enticing in their simplicity to a young guy who's trying to work out who the hell he is, compared to narratives even that I've been trying to craft that are like, ask questions, let's all be fluid, let's work out what works for us in what context. That is in some ways more anxiety inducing. So we have a role as, new voices for contemporary healthy masculinity to get a surer through line to these young guys that isn't like, it depends, but rather is much more around, here is what you've told us matters to you. And so we are going to give you advice because it's what you seek, but it's not going to be rigid advice.
And on that, we just saw young men come out in huge numbers to make a significant play in voting Donald Trump back into power, and in large part because they feel seen and heard by him more so than the alternative. But then also the female vote for Trump increased as well. So what does that say about the cultural moment that we're in?
I think it shows that, firstly, the media is massive here. And everyone, when I say the media, they think of like Fox News and television. I'm not talking about traditional media. I'm talking about the types of social media, podcasting, where young men and young women are going. There is a splintering in many ways of their content consumption, which is what's really interesting, is that despite differences in voting, between the genders, largely young men and young women are pretty progressive. Yeah, they've got pretty progressive ideals. They largely agree on reproductive rights. They have similar thoughts on education and health funding and that type of stuff. And yet, for the first time in a very long time, we saw that massive gender split in the election. And yes, more young women still did vote for Trump than was expected or than before. But in that 14%, and these numbers will become clearer later, but that 14% swing by young men towards Trump, I really don't think is because he actually offered them anything. There's no policy. He's got no policies for them. There's nothing in there that's like, hey, young men, we're going to do this for you. But he went on Theo Von. He went on Rogan. He clarified consistently across the board through the way in which he engaged Dana White, Hulk Hogan, all of these guys that are considered, the pinnacle of masculine identity. He said, hey, young guys, I know what you like. I'm going to come into your space and I'm going to talk to you. And that is something that we didn't really see the Democrats do. In many ways, I actually think that the Democrats' policy is going to, would have been potentially more fruitful in some ways for young men, but there was no conveying of that. They were not deemed a population of interest, or if they were deemed in many ways a threat. And by virtue of that, they went very hard on the young female vote, and it just didn't turn out the way that they'd hoped.
There's some similarities there with our approach to young men at the moment in schools and making them feel like the problem, and then the Democratic Party and their approach to young men in the United States making them feel like the problem as well. And then come in and you offer an alternative to that. And of course, it's extremely appealing. And it's not because all of those men are suddenly misogynists or racists or transphobes. It's because they want to be able to be at the table with someone who sees them and wants to hear their opinions and isn't demonizing them unnecessarily. There's a theme in our zeitgeist at the moment that coming out in support of men like you do, like I do, must inherently come at the expense of women. We saw this polarization, as you just mentioned. That was a huge theme in the election, where it was voting for Kamala is a vote for women and voting for Trump is a vote for men. and just ridiculously simplistic. But that narrative being one of the main ones that emerged, why is that division gaining so much steam in recent years?
I love that I'm becoming a political commentator now. This is fun. I'm glad I've got the moustache.
This is our most political episode, but it's all relevant.
Nuts. The simplistic answer to a simplistic, outcome is that the gender binary is so strong, that men are from Mars, women are from Venus bullshit, which everyone, who is worth their salt has gone, nah, we don't believe in this anymore. Nonetheless, here comes this argument from both sides, the gender wars, and the trans situation is a totally different thing that was weaponized, and we can, discuss that if you want to. But really, what happened here is that for some reason, the zero-sum game of you can only deal with 50% of the population at a time. And I've thought about it in research terms as like, we're not very good at considering like moderation, which is like in a research study, you'll have, here is, the outcome of interest, which is that society gets better and everyone looks after each other and health gets better and gender equality gets better. And at the moment we have, you need to speak with women, you need to improve the rights of women, the empowerment of women, the gender, pay gap needs to reduce, and you will lead to a greater sense of gender equality and a better thriving society. What we don't have a good enough message for is that, in fact, you kind of have to go through men in order to get there. This is a multiplicative, they have to come together. There has to be an interaction. And there are so many people in the progressive side of politics. There are so many people that I engage with, so many feminists who go, I totally understand that and I agree. We will not prevail unless we get men on board. Like, I've been working a lot in gender-based violence recently. And, when it comes down to it, if the number of perpetrators, are majority men, you're going to have to talk to the men about this in order to stop it. In a similar vein, if we want to find ways to make sure that we have an equitable society, to make sure that everyone is thriving and surviving, what it comes down to is that you need young men and boys to thrive, to flourish. And what's happening at the moment is we're going, actually, we're just going to, this is only certain pockets of the, political elite who are going, no, we need to double down. We need to make sure that we can only focus on one group at a time, when in fact, it is the interaction between them that's so important. And it is the fact that the vast majority, and we know this at Movember, we talk about it consistently, the vast majority of the health burden of poor men's health falls on women and girls. Yeah. So if a guy has prostate cancer, has depression, has a disability, whatever it might be, the women in their lives are often doing the caring. So that's a perfect example of the ripple effect of not supporting and looking after and creating policy and research and programs for men to improve the health outcomes of women as well. What we need to do is see that these things need to be dealt with at the same time, rather than going, our party's for them, your party's for us. Both parties should always be putting forward women's health and men's health, women's equality, men's, economic and educational equality as well. There's certain things that are just moving in the wrong direction. And like, if we don't have boys graduating from high school or going to university, or their health outcomes are going to shit, everyone will suffer.
I love that answer, and very short-sighted and overly simplistic to approach it as, oh, well, men had their turn. The oppressors had their turn for centuries, so now it's all about women, not seeing that behind that attitude is not allowing men to help women to thrive and vice versa, and that we all live in this society together and our strength and our love and our success are intertwined, and that they need to be. And that there's any necessity of one has to rise above the other and the other must fall, and the patriarchy has to fall in order for the
everyone. Exactly. It's just like we've made so many strides, and the backlash response that we're witnessing amongst men and boys who are feeling left out we can say, just like get over it, stop being fragile. It's like the term toxic masculinity, which I'm sure you're going to touch on, so I'm not going to steal your thunder.
Good
but
guess.
Like, we can either go, all right, we're not going to deal with this and you should just get over it and move on, or we can go, actually, this is getting in the way of what we want. This is like, we need to speak to them or we're not going to get to our solution. And it's a very pragmatic, I'm really obsessed with like pragmatic approaches here, which is that there has to be a third lane, which is that your outcome of interest is here and you fundamentally cannot get there without getting these guys on the boat. Like, it's not going to happen. And so what I really want to stress, and something that I've copped a lot on my LinkedIn and otherwise, I am not in any way suggesting that this is women's work. This is not to add more emotional labor onto women's shoulders. This is to just say that I think that this is a reality, and you and I and plenty of other men and plenty of other men's organizations can step in here to start to have this conversation and do this work alongside women. And, so I really hope that we can get to the point where we're not going, hey, you've been oppressed for however long, and now you need to make sure that you get your dad and brother on board this movement. It's like, it's not their work, but it is hopefully in good faith a conversation that they can join in.
What happens when you send boys the message that they're the problem and their problems don't matter?
They tell you to go to hell. And there's two options here, really. The first is that they backlash and they get really angry and they tell you to go to hell. The second is that they become silent and they isolate, they distance themselves. It leads to this shame-fueled response and it drives them into the darkness. So you're either getting straightforward anger and aggression, and there's a meta-narrative here, which is that, like, we like to think we're going to get to a point where having these types of discussions isn't going to be so emotion-fueled and isn't going to lead to aggression or violence or anger. Yeah, and I hope we can get there. But the reality is right now, it makes them feel like a failure. And there might be fragility underneath that. You call it what you want, but fundamentally, when you start to talk about people in a very homogenizing way that doesn't allude to their experience, like telling a 14-year-old that he has male privilege when he has never been privy to anything before, he's not aware of what his father and grandfather experienced, that's not his life. It's like if you go, to a 31-year-old farmer who's struggling to make ends meet because of a drought, and he's living in, rural backwater Australia, and you say, you've got so much power and privilege, you don't even know it. That is not his reality. That is not what, and it may be true on a factual, economic standpoint, but it is not his reality. And we need to see the difference between casting these aspersions about whole populations and looking at an individual's experience. Those two things can and must coexist. And we must have compassion and accountability in equal ways. But when it comes down to it, what we're witnessing is the growing countercultural community, standpoint, which is to be expected, which is that these young guys, firstly, they voted with their feet, and secondly, they end up in the likes of 4chan, Reddit, wherever they go, or they're listening to podcasts and creating content, they're influencers themselves, that is trying to put a stake in the ground of, we're not going to take this and we are going to start to backlash and push into these more traditional ways of being that are often misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic, whatever it might be, because they feel like they're on the ropes. And so as a result, they end up in these, really problematic ways, trying to get rid of and challenge marginalized communities, which is really sad, when in fact, instead of being like a hunted animal, they should realize that we need to find ways for connection. But it takes good faith on both sides to come into these conversations and go, actually, masculinity has beauty and has, various forms of toxicity depending on who you are and where you are. And there needs to be a more nuanced discussion around the fact that young men especially are so afraid of being cancelled and alienated and completely cut out from the conversation, that they are going and creating the conversation elsewhere on their own, and it's not regulated, it's not discussed, and it's dangerous in many instances.
Does suggesting that we shouldn't call young men and boys privileged and toxic make you right-wing now?
You tell me, mate. I think that the sensible middle, and even much of the left would agree. I think that this is where my pragmatic hat comes in, which is that, as I said, lots of people go, who cares if it upsets them? It's the truth. There is a lot of toxicity out there. And I go, I'm not suggesting that there isn't a lot of harm that's happening. I'm suggesting that this is not the approach that is going to get you what you want. That feels far more important to me than the purest approach of, I'm going to use this term because it's the term that I think fits here. And I go, well, the young man's telling you to fuck off, and now you've lost your audience, mate. Like, that is all that matters. You've lost your audience. The person you need to engage in the movement that you are trying to create is no longer listening. That's the end of the conversation. So you can sit up there in your ivory tower and offer all of these suggestions about what is going on from a theoretical perspective, or you can climb down and go, hey, let's have a discussion, man to man, woman to man, whatever is happening for you, to understand their lived experience and to not condone or excuse bad behavior. No one is suggesting that needs to happen. But you need to make them feel heard and understood in order to get them to buy in to the change that you're hoping to seek.
And the research that you do actually shows that.
100%. It's across the board. These guys tell us they are feeling maligned and misunderstood, and as a result, they do not feel that they can make their voices heard. They do not feel like they have a place and a space to show up in, the mainstream culture, and so they go into these countercultural spaces. And the further we push them there, the further we cannot see them, the further we cannot regulate some of these places, and the more we are going to see extremist and radical kind of behavior.
And then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? We are manifesting more of this behavior by the approach that we're taking to trying to deal with it. And you've said that we're in an age where the anecdote reigns over data. Is that...
Wow, I'm being quoted back.
You said we're in an age where the anecdote reigns over data. Is that to say we'd rather base our opinions and policies on emotions and ideology as opposed to the facts?
I think so. I think, post-truth world, I really think that there is so much power in the anecdote, and the anecdote should be used as a means to reinforce the facts. It should be used as a way to go, here is the data, here is what the vast majority of people are telling us, and then here are some lived experience examples to really bring this home, to really make it human. And instead, we are going, here is my experience. This is what happened to me as an individual, and I've seen it in my two mates. And therefore, this is all that there is. And once again, the media is like propping that up. It's like one person, one man has 150 million people who's listening to them. Whatever they say becomes fact, rather than, it doesn't matter if it's science or otherwise. It's like there has to be ways, like history is being questioned, like there has to be ways that the facts can be the foundation and the anecdote can be the embellishment on top of that. And I am very concerned that, especially when it comes to these ideological rifts that we're witnessing now, that we are completely missing a trick when we're seeing the truth of the fact on a population level being completely overlooked.
And we have to have objective truth. We can't do away with objective truth, because for those of us that have read 1984, that doesn't end very well. And then there's such a thing as facts.
Yeah. This is the issue right now. With anecdote comes emotion, and there are so many policies that are happening across Australia, across, the States and the UK that are really driven by emotion. And that is not to say that, again, it's not a really important part of decision making. But when we're saying, this is what's happened to me, and therefore this is what's happening to everyone, that's when we really lose out.
So true. And when we feel strongly about a divisive issue, and there's a lot of these issues that people are feeling very strongly about at the moment, delving into tribalism becomes very tempting. There's a certain safety and a simplicity in subscribing wholeheartedly to an ideology, and there's a rush in telling the person on the other side of the fence that they're wrong. I wouldn't say it's a good feeling, but it's definitely, there's a high there. I think there's an addictive high, and we see it particularly play out on X, on other social media, where people are building an identity around that tribalism. They're getting the reinforcement. They're feeling like they are somebody based off spouting those opinions, and you don't really have to go and learn anything in order to do that. So it's a cheap and nasty high that makes us feel something. What's the downside of constructing our identity around a political party or a social movement?
You lose sight of the pragmatic endpoint, and you end up with blinkers on, which is that new information comes in and you immediately disregard it based on emotion or ideology, rather than all of the other factors which should be taken into account. Like, I've always been a shit stirrer to an extent. And someone asked me the other day, they were like, what was going on during your clinical practice, like, your clinical training? Like, how did you become the person that you are? And I just said, I believe that being a devil's advocate is a really healthy part of society. As long as you're not being obnoxious and disrespectful. And I think I started out that way. I really like to think that I'm not anymore. I've done enough clinical work. I understand, the way in which to engage with people, hopefully to get the most out of them. And so what I do is I play devil's advocate. I question systems. I question norms. I question anecdotal evidence, whatever it might be, to get to the nub of, like, what is the issue here and how we can go about solving it. And what happens when you have these camps is that because they become increasingly polarized and further away from each other, that meaningful, sensible middle, which is the road to recovery, the road to connection, is paved over, and we can't see it anymore. And so what I'm really, really focused on is trying to dig that up and consistently show, wait a second, here is the path. Don't forget, here is the path. This is the way in which we can walk together to get to where we need to go. You can hold on. This is the thing. I'm not suggesting you're not going to hold on to some of your views. You have a lived experience. You have trauma. You have emotion. You have feelings about the world that you should have, and you should hold on to them. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to, every once in a while, divert, when you've got new information, divert your trajectory back towards a discussion point in the middle that is going to actually get us somewhere. Because right now, we're on the road to hell, mate. Like, it's just not, this is not the way society was supposed to be built. And I fundamentally hold the way in which media is being consumed and constructed in many ways to be responsible for that, because the Venn diagram of what different generations and different sexes used to watch and view is slowly parting. It used to be a massive overlap. We all kind of read the newspaper or all watched Channel 10 News, and now it's like, wait a second, you as a 14-year-old girl can literally watch nothing. You can read no news that I will ever see. And that is very frightening to me.
Yeah, we just exist in these huge echo chambers, and the algorithm creates that, but it does it for a reason, because we engage with that, and we engage with that because that makes us feel safe, or that works with our version of the world, that reinforces those feelings that make us go about our day feeling better about the world that we exist in. And there is that sense of identity and that tribalism and a positive feeling that we want in belonging, which human connection, belonging. These are some of the things that are right at the core of what we're striving for. And they're presented to us in these echo chambers where we see all these other people. Look at all these other people who agree with me, and then look at what happens to the dissenting voices because they are so wrong. And to have the discussion, which is really what we're talking about here, is as human beings and as a society, we need to be able to have the discussion. If I totally disagree, I think, with what you think, and you think you totally disagree with me, we need to actually talk about why do you think that? Why do I think that? In a way where we take the hostility out of it and it's respectful. But because things are so heated, both sides look at it like if you even engage that side, then you're betraying us by not just hurling shit at them immediately. And then you're at a stalemate. We're at like a cultural stalemate where both camps are growing and getting angrier, but nothing's ever being sorted out because we're not communicating, because we're not actually coming to the table.
Yeah. So, God, that was really well put, Callum. I think that, I use my grandma as a perfect example here. Yeah. She was born in Europe during the war. She's got a very specific set of ways of understanding the world that often, trauma driven. And so I respect that. I understand that she's going to see things very differently to me. I had the ability to be educated because of her struggle to get free and come to Australia on her own. Now she calls me a goody for like attempting to find that third path and connect us. But the conversations I have with her, because I really use various people in my life to try and cut my teeth on how to frame things in a way that's palatable, in a way that's respectful. And there's no better person than a 94-year-old woman to try to question some of this stuff. And really, what I'm asking of society for, and what I'm asking my LinkedIn followers for when they come for me, or Instagram, or whatever it is, I'm asking for courage. I'm asking for us to have brave, courageous, and fundamentally uncomfortable conversations. And there is, I think, on a broader societal level, a complete lack of desire or willingness to sit in discomfort. And I pride myself on the fact that I don't believe that cold showers are the only type of discomfort I can have in my life. I do love a cold shower and an ice bath, but really what it comes down to...
You're such a bro.
Is like,
that's so right.
I'm such a bro. Thank you. I just need to get that in there for my product placement. But the thing that I really want to espouse is the fact that like that is the best part of humanity, is being able to sit across from someone who doesn't see the world the way that you do, who doesn't agree with your fundamental values, and you can have a robust and respectful conversation with them where we're not all triggered and microaggressive. Instead, we are, and it's funny, it sounds like I'm tackling like this woke culture war, cancel culture stuff. Like I consider myself like extremely progressive. And now I'm here just being like, if we are going to succeed, we have to meet. We have to sit in the town square and have a discussion. And since Twitter is such a fucking cesspool and we're not going to do it there, let's try to do it in person. Let's try to do it in other platforms. Let's find ways to lean into that and not be trigger happy on our keyboards. And really what it comes down to is I think that health and well-being is the greatest entry point for lots of this, which is why I do what I do. And it's why our organization does, which is that, no one is going to fight about the fact that they want their son to grow up in a world where they have purpose, meaning, and health, and they can flourish, And that is the access point for all of this. And that is the way in which I enter all of these conversations, which is that I know that if we can support him, he will feel better and you will feel better, and society will inevitably succeed at, achieving its goals. That is all that matters to me.
And can we separate singular issues from the actual person? There's this attitude of, well, I know you believe this one thing, therefore you are bad, and I'm not going to be talking to you about anything else because that's an indictment of your entire being, the fact that you think this about the environment or you think this about gender or whatever it must be, and then vice versa. And so there's no more discussion there. It's just like, well, you're this kind of person because I know that you would vote yes to this, or you say yes or no to this particular question. And so that's the end of it. And it's just like so juvenile.
It is juvenile, but it's also I'm sure you've been in conversations where you've gotten this, where you say something and someone responds with something that is so jarring and insulting, even though it's not about you necessarily. It's just like, wow, your worldview hurts me. And this is the thing that's really difficult, which is that lots of this is really, really personal. Like if you're talking about the LGBTQIA plus community or our Indigenous community and the way in which the conversation has kind of happened in this country and, overseas, like it's really hard. It's really hard to like sit there and listen to something where you feel personally victimized. But I think, fundamentally that when you end up in those echo chambers, that stuff calcifies even more. And, we've always said the answer to Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or racism is to get in contact with these communities and realize that actually they're not as scary as you thought, rather than this distancing and then you caricature them and then you end up in that, and that's what we've done with young men in many ways as well, which is that, the amount of mothers that email me that are like, thank God, please, someone is talking about the boys, and the way in which, the beauty that I see in their struggle. And then there's a large group of people who are either academics or they work in a totally different space, and they just say, no deal. Like I have no time for this. I have no time for them. They voted against my rights and therefore they don't deserve my attention. And I say they should deserve double your attention then, because they are the ones getting in the way. So you're going to have to find a way to get them on board. But I really think that splintering is just fundamentally going to lead into a further polarization where we end up having very thin overlapping values, and that's worrying to me.
Anytime you're painting a particular demographic with the same brush, it's missing so much of the point. Like saying all young men, all young women, all old men, all LGBT are this. They're all the same. And you're talking about massive groups of people, and within those groups are very different individuals with very different experiences and backgrounds, and we just love to simplify. And I think that shows how much the media, both forms of it, have framed our thinking, that we want that traditional 30-second, well, now it's a 30-second clip. It used to be a 10-second soundbite with the mainstream news or a 3-minute interview on Fox or CNN or whatever it might have been. And now it's, I watched a couple of videos on TikTok that said this about this group of people. And now I am of the belief that that whole group of people is like this based on those couple of videos. And it's mixed in with our shortened attention span and all the information that's constantly coming at us as well. And it's like, what bits can I pull out here that make sense to me right now, that make me feel more comfortable and like I have something to say and I have an opinion and I can sort of build my identity around it a bit and I can pull that out. I don't have to do any work. I don't have to go and talk to these people. I don't have to do any research. I can just decide who I am as a person based off of what I pulled out of my feed. And anyone else who goes against that, I won't talk to them and I'll just go hang out with whoever else saw those same videos and says that I'm a legend.
Everyone's saying that, mate. What do you think, about the 2.5 hour podcast? Because we keep talking about bite-sized, reels, but there are like huge numbers of young men who are sitting through a 2-hour Rogan interview. And that idea that they don't have the attention span is kind of being challenged.
Oh, absolutely. And 2 hours on the short end. I think where we've witnessed the pendulum swing back, and now there's platforms for that, which challenges what's been since the invention of television news anyway, where, I think part of what the Democratic Party suffered with was sort of saying to their voters that they don't have the attention span and that they don't need to sit down and have the full discussion because who has time for that? And I think we're witnessing all around the world that people actually do want to hear a 3-hour conversation, they will sit there and listen because it comes off as authentic. It comes off as genuine. It has to, because it can't be sterilized in the same way as other forms of media are, where we can script it, we can make sure it all runs to time. If it's a long form conversation like that, no one can really hide who they are for that long. And I think we're yearning for anywhere that we can get genuine connection from, anywhere we can hear two people having a real honest conversation where both sides are actually getting to talk, and it's not the typical TV show format, news interview format, where someone's talking, the whole thing's only going to go for 20 minutes. They're getting halfway through their answer and then they're getting shut down, or they're saying, okay, but you said this, did you or did you not say this? And trying to fit people into these boxes to get a getcha moment. That's going to turn into a reel that people are going to see and then base their opinion off. I think people are getting wise to that is all smoke and mirrors, and it takes things out of context and it doesn't show you the truth of what things are. And I think what people want, and what journalism used to be and now is morphing into podcasts and these other kinds of commentators who are actually becoming journalists without really wanting to. And yeah, they have their bias, but it's meant to be objective. It's meant to be, here's what this person says, here's what this person says. I didn't come into it with an agenda, grilling them, try to get a particular response or put them into a corner. It's just to show you a bit about who they are, why they think that way, and then you can decide for yourself. And I think the thing that we need in those spaces, in those incredibly popular podcasts, is to make sure that all those voices are getting a go. And that also takes those voices from whoever identifies as being on the other side of the spectrum to say, yeah, I will come on Joe Rogan. Yeah, I will go on Theo Von or some of these, or Jordan Peterson, whatever, these right-wing shows. I will accept that invitation to have that conversation, because I'm not going to approach it like I'm being attacked the whole time. And there's the onus on the host and the guests from both sides of the spectrum to have that conversation. I think like it could be massively powerful. Podcasting is the space for this to happen. And if we can get both sides of those arguments on all these issues out there for millions of people to see over 3 hours, and you're like, oh, really, that is what they say? That is what the evidence says? You know, they actually couldn't explain their point, or they could, or they just got too heated because they can't actually back it up. I think that's how we can actually get to the truth. I don't know if we can do it with the traditional formats we've been using, and that's why they're dying.
100%. And I think that the reason that lots of people haven't entered onto these, you know, depending on which side they're on, is because they think it is a trap, or they think it's not offered in good faith. And if we can get more, you know, I had a discussion with Richard Reeves about this, where we were both like, there is very, you know, there are very few places that neither of us will go to share our message. I trust my intent and my research and my team, as does he and his work. And it's like, I want to, if there is a platform where I can share that and I can stick to my guns and I can bring it to a new audience, that should be the outcome of interest here. So I do think that nonetheless, there is skepticism around, like, you know, Harris going on to Rogan, and it's like, he says it'll all be sweet, but it's like, who knows how that's kind of going to go? And then it's with the gods, and then that could have swung everything. It all ended up going to shit anyway, but you never really know what's going to happen there. But what I find really interesting is that they got bucketed. These, you know, it doesn't matter which group it is. If we call it Peterson, Tate, Rogan, Theo Von, whoever, they get grouped over here. They're all deemed to be the same again.
And they're massively different. They're
wildly
so different.
Like Tate is a criminal, yeah. And
it's that oversimplification again that we love to do, where it's just like, oh, chuck these people in this box, and we do it with the other side, no doubt. But yeah, just we lump them all in together. Well, hold on. How is a comedian, MMA expert, commentator, podcaster the same as someone who's a professor, the same as someone who is locked in a Romanian jail most of the time? Like, how are they the same person? And by simplifying it like that and lumping them all in together, you lose the power of your argument in deeming them to all be irredeemable, because anyone who actually knows those different characters knows that they're different and knows that they're not just a couple of simple things that you can throw at them. And so you don't listen to the criticism like perhaps you would otherwise.
Yeah. And so, I often ask people, because there is the vast majority of stuff that is said on any of those, podcasts that is like anti-science, that I'm just like so against, that is misogynistic, transphobic, whatever it might be. Yeah. I don't agree with lots of what's said, but firstly, they're like 3 hours long, as we've said. So there's a lot that's said. Secondly, they come at it from totally different perspectives. And thirdly, lots of it is really engaging and connects with lots of these guys. So we need to understand it, if nothing else. Yeah. And when you go, no, that person is over here in this box and I'm not going to, in any way, redeem that personality or connect with it. What it does is it goes, hey, your 150 million person viewership, you're all broken and you're all the problem, and here's a red flag and you're over here. And I think that is like the perfect example of how society will splinter and crumble and crash, instead of going, and this is not necessarily like a date situation, because, intimate relationships are riskier. Yeah, they're threatening, it's difficult. But like on a day-to-day basis, in a university, in a workplace, wherever it might be, being willing to have that discussion of like, did you listen to this stuff? And he goes, yes. And then you not walking away and saying, I'm never going to see him again, I'm sending an email to HR, instead of going, what is it about it? Be curious. What is it about that podcast that you really liked? Did you not like anything? Did you find anything? And that's how you can actually understand someone. You can actually understand the nuance, where when we speak to young men, they say, I like Andrew Tate's Bugattis, I hate his misogyny. It's like, and this is always, there's so much nuance here that I spend every waking moment thinking about, which is that a 15-year-old boy telling me that he is discerning of the content that he is watching and saying, I'm going to take the good and leave the bad. I kind of call bullshit on that sometimes. Yeah. But you got to have good faith to even enter in that conversation and go, what part of this matters to you? What resonates with you? What do you like? What do you not like? And how can we, as hopefully, the health brigade, come in and actually utilize those skills to our advantage?
Yeah, because then you can actually get somewhere, because in that discussion, then you're unearthing values and perspective and learning about like, oh, so that's appealing to you because you're seeing things in this way and you're feeling that way because you've got these influences coming in and you've got people telling you this and you're feeling a certain way, and then there's seems like an outlet, and that kind of makes sense. And now we can have a discussion rather than just, oh my God, do you follow that guy or listen to that guy? Like, don't talk to me anymore. Or starting a conversation like I've been hearing podcasts in the last few days with sound bites of people saying, just going up to people and saying, who did you vote for? And if they say Trump, then that's it. Like they're never going to speak to them again. Like it's just no way to start a conversation.
Exactly. So this is the thing. It's like, if you went up to someone and you asked them who they voted for, or and this is, again, you have to be in the right headspace. Yeah, this is around your emotion, self-care, whatever. But if I go up to a young guy and I talk to them about watching Screamo Tate videos, yeah, what is it that they literally say? It's entertaining, it's motivating, it's funny, it's crazy. Like, and if I didn't enter into that conversation and I said, you are toxic and disgusting and go to hell, what that does is it goes to him, all right, I'm the enemy and I'm going to take even more of these really, really problematic views that I'm witnessing and apply them to my life, rather than sitting down with my sister or my mum who's curious about what I'm watching and her going, actually, that thing that you're talking about that he's kind of discussing? Here's an experience that happened in my life that actually shows you that can be really harmful, and that this is what this makes me feel. And I know you love me and respect me, and maybe we can actually have a discussion about the impacts of this type of content from a personal perspective, rather than, because you can't even have that conversation if you red flag it. If you put them over here, you can't even go, hey man, I actually find that really offensive and harmful, and this is why, this is what it, can you understand that or not? And why not? And how can we kind of meet in the middle and have a discussion? Not everyone wants to have that discussion. not everyone wants to, connect with these young dudes fundamentally. And so for those of us who do, we've got to do more of it to kind of pull them out of the depth and the darkness, because that place, our research kind of tells us that they're feeling like motivated and driven and pumped up by lots of it. But underneath that is a serious isolation and mental health dilemma that is going on for them, which is like, I don't actually feel like I can be enough, I can be good enough, I can succeed. Because what this does is it creates this pedestal of masculinity. This content is creating this, this unassailable ideal of what is possible. And none of these young men will ever succeed in achieving that. And so what we need to do is actually show them that and go, hey guys, you're taking some, you're leaving the rest, but it's making you actually feel shit. And you're kind of blaming other stuff for that. But I reckon it's actually this content.
And the thing that strikes me about Tate in particular is that he is the embodiment of the teenage boy dream. As a
14-year-old, as a grown man,
as a grown man, like when you're a teenager and you've got no idea, and you think, what do you want out of life? And you say, I want all these cars and all these women and massive houses, and I'm going to walk around with no shirt on, smoking a cigar, and it's going to be so cool, man. And then he just permanently acts that out, and then they see that at that age, and they're like, "That's it. That's fulfillment and happiness is that." And I just think it's so obvious that would be appealing, because I think many of us thought that when we were teenage boys, like, what do we want in life? Oh, I want to be rich. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. I'll be able to fight. I'll look cool. I'll have tats. I'll be able to get heaps of chicks. Like, it'll be sick. And then like he lives that out, and they go, yeah, see, it is sick, and everyone else sucks. And yeah, so
and this is the thing. We've got so many cultural, situations going on there, which is like he is venerated and is also despised and is, in some way sublimated as a god as well. And there's like all of these things that are tensions that are going on, and he can kind of get away with stuff, which is madness. Hopefully, he doesn't at the end of the day, but it is, the question remains, and the work that we have to do long term, that should not, this is the thing, when the question that everyone is asking is, why is this the standard that young men want? Why is a 14-year-old looking up to that and going, that's what I want? And what the answer is often coming out is like, this is like misogynistic, homophobic, horrible men power patriarchy. Yeah. And whether or not that is the case, that there's this inbuilt thing that everyone is kind of seeking because they want all of that, you're never going to undo it by silencing and distancing those boys. Like, you need to find a way to offer them that expansive, flexible role model instead. Otherwise, by just saying, that's not it, you're an idiot, they're just going to go, he was right. He told me that. Or
even worse, that's not it, you're an idiot, be more like girls, be more feminine. Yeah. That's not very appealing to young men either.
It's not appealing to young men either. And I think that we need to find a way, and we've discussed this so often, that I like to think that there aren't that many people who are saying be more like women. It's just that when they're trying to talk about healthy masculinity or positive masculinity, they don't know how to frame it in a way that isn't feminine. Like, why do we not have an ideal that is about altruism and service and caring and, all of these positive masculine ways of being that aren't just like be softer and gentle and, traditional feminine virtues and norms.
Yeah, so you're working on that, mate? You should have had that figured out by now.
That's my spare time. We've got a massive project that we're working on right now. So I will come back next year and I will have answers for you on how that works.
You'll have the antithesis to Andrew Tate rival that's gonna resonate on that level.
Yep. Let's hope. Let's hope. Someone's got to do it.
What's resulted from society making Tate the ultimate scapegoat and saying, like, that's public enemy number one, it's his fault?
Just a splintering. It's led to camps again. It's led to, all of our energy being directed into an individual that doesn't deserve our time or energy. Like, I'm kind of, we've spoken about him more, I think, today than I have in plenty of other podcasts because I think this is a really important conversation. But I have like a a no-go zone on him, because you just start to inflame this conversation where he gets so much fucking airtime when he doesn't deserve it. But that's the answer here. That's what's happened.
I think ironically we're talking about why does he get so much airtime while giving him airtime?
It's alarmist. The whole thing is alarmist. And what we're trying to do, I hope.
Our culture is alarmist though, isn't it?
I know, but we're trying to create a sensitive, sensible curiosity. That's what I want. It's like curiosity, I just think is really, and curiosity and courage. And I think that those are, when we talk about healthy masculinity, those should be like on the top here, which is like and that's what empathy comes from. Curiosity and that discomfort and courage is like going into places where you don't necessarily know the answer, where you don't necessarily belong, and entering in good faith and having those conversations. What happens if we make him enemy number one is that anyone who's in that flock is placed over there, and they are, persona non grata, and there is no discussion with them. And so we need to find that ability to actually say, no, there's more nuance here, and there is a means through which courageous and curious conversations will actually bring us together.
And it's not so simplistic and surface level as to, if you were to depose him, that another one wouldn't spring up in his place, and that there aren't hundreds of other ones anyway. He's just the one that gets all the attention, because that's not really the issue here. That's the symptom. It's not the core of what's underneath that, which is what your work revolves around, which is why do we have these perspectives and these feelings, and where's that coming from, and what do young men want to be, and what do they feel like they're being forced to be, and how do you market curiosity and courage and empathy to young men in a way that's going to make them connect with it when they're a teenager?
Exactly. And they're not sexy, and they're not spoken about in sexy ways, and I think that it'd be great if that's like the thing that we talk about when it comes to dating as well, because that's always the thing. Women always go, he never asked me any questions. That's like the most common thing that you always hear. It's like, if men just knew that asking questions in good faith is kind of the way to get a date, things might shift here. But it is that when we amplify these negative voices, they get amplified into these godlike figures that end up taking all of our attention, when in fact what we're trying to do is cut them and reduce them down and shrink them. And we need to get better at that as a society. And that doesn't mean canceling them. It means going, I actually understand that creating a furor, this spinning, is actually going to reinforce and double down on the problem, rather than, and this is what we've done fundamentally with young men, we are obsessed with risk and we are avoidant of solutions. And so we go, he's going to get ADHD, he's going to be on the streets, he's going to join a gang, he's going to be a drug taker. All of these things kind of exist when we talk about young men. And when parents are about to have a boy, like, the thoughts that run through their head are like that type of like externalizing thing, like rambunctious, how's this going to end up, type stuff, rather than coming at it from a perspective of growth and capacity and flourishing and health, of like, what is possible here? We should be talking about aspirational masculinity. We should be talking about what we should be seeking and achieving, not what we shouldn't be looking after. And I know we started with this, so hopefully it's a nice counterpoint here, which is that we need to be shifting the conversation towards that air of possibility. And really the vacuum, we talk about role models, yeah? Everyone's always so obsessed with men need more role models. No, we need better role modeling. We don't need to put more people on pedestals. We need to have a society where men and masculinities exist in all of their diversity, are spoken about in a diverse number of ways that are understanding of the health and the harm that kind of coexist, for various guys, and where we can strive towards a conversation that is constructive and that is built on shared values and meaning.
Yeah, and we need men in the lives of young boys who are conducting themselves in a respectful, loving, open, masculine manner that boys can model themselves on. We don't need a pin-up boy to fight Tate in some epic battle for masculinity, you know?
No more of that.
Yeah. So, okay, I like that. And you do often hear, well, where are the role models? And I think that the answer is that they're all around us. And we need to
they're just
actually...
not on the front. They're not on the front pages of the newspaper, because it's like, unless you're Weinstein, Epstein, or Trump, you're not going to get there. But like, there are dads, there's, you know, veterans, there's tradies, there's like but they're just not, it's not drama. And so we don't want to talk about it, when in fact it's, you know, and there are groups like, you know, Man Enough and She's Not Your Rehab, and all of these groups do once a week, they do like a post of like beautiful, positive masculinity of, you know, dads doing awesome stuff. And I just hope that narrative, that construction of what's possible, of all that exists, starts to get more airtime.
Me too. How much progress can be made to improve the mental health of boys and men in this current social political environment?
I'm not going to stop, but I think that we are up against a barrier of progress, which is that it kind of means that we can only do things in silos, because you cannot get like whole of community or society agreement on something, and it's considered to work with men and boys and their health and well-being is for some reason still in certain circumstances considered political. I would love the eradication of that, so that boundary and that barrier of how much funding, time, you know, whatever it might be that you can get is broken down, and you end up with the full spectrum of capacity there to be able to connect with them in different places and spaces, to talk with them in workplaces, so that it's not considered you being a men's rights activist, but it's considered as like, this is actually good for the workplace. Economically, it's good for the other women in the workplace. It's good to be able to take, you know, men into this space and provide them with a voice and a place to discuss things with a, you know, healthy facilitator that is actually going to be able to make meaningful change there. And at the moment, it's like, it's too policed. And I think that we can get to a happy middle ground where that kind of just starts to expand over time. And fundamentally, what's gone on for the past 12 months, you know, we're at a breaking point where this is going to happen. Like, I have no doubt this is going to happen. There's enough people who really want to do this work, who believe in its capacity to actually have flow on ripple effects, that it's going to happen anyway. It's just a matter of time.
Let's hope so. Thanks, Zac.
Thanks, Carl.
That's it for this episode. If you like what we're all about, support us by following Young Blood Men's Mental Health on Instagram and Young Blood Mental Health on TikTok. Every podcast episode is recorded in professional quality video, and they're all up on our Young Blood Men's Mental Health YouTube channel. So please show some love and subscribe. You can find everything there is to know about the podcast at youngbloodmensmentalhealth.com. And most importantly, please share these stories with anyone in your life who needs to know they're not alone. We're all in this together. Catch you next time.